Right. So today we're concentrating on Italian legends, and as it's always invariably an opportunity to pour the wrong wine in the glass to begin with, and that's entirely normally my fault as I changed the tasting order last minute. Can I just make sure that everyone either has or is about to have the Villagresti 2014? Has anyone plunged in with anything else? Nope. Oh, that's a tremendous start. That's a very good start. Good. Excellent. Fine. So this is
you're just picking the right one, Tom.
You sorry. Good. Excellent. Thank you, David. The thing. Here comes Rajesh. Good. Excellent. The thing with this evening, which is a little bit different from any of the tastings we've done previously, is we're really digging a bit deeper into two specific producers this evening. Two very different producers, but two, equally well regarded. I mean, critically, it doesn't get much higher praise in Italy, or frankly anywhere, than these two. And the other linking factor is they are two of my favorite wineries, and they are families I have known for at least 15 years. So it's been amazing to see how these estates have evolved, to see how their reputation has, grown out of, I mean, not out of nowhere, but I mean, now they are in absolutely the front league. And it's been wonderful for us to be part of that journey. So yeah, this is going to be probably a touch more technical than previous tastings, or it doesn't have to be, but it can be, because we can really look specifically at vintage character, at how at evolution of wine. We can really look at how the passing of time shows the maturation of wine and how that changes the character. I hope it will be a good opportunity to learn a bit more about Italy, and also, of course, as ever, your questions, your comments are very, very welcome indeed. So don't hold back. Now, without further ado, we'll turn to our first wine, which is the Villagresti from San Leonardo. San Leonardo, for those of you who haven't been present when I've been talking about this estate previously, either at a virtual tasting or at a real life tasting or dinner, we've done a number over the years. We probably normally do a San Leonardo dinner at least once a year, in fact. So this sadly be the first year we haven't done an IRL event with San Leonardo, but it's an absolutely fascinating story. The story began back in the 60s when Marchese Carlo Guerri Gonzaga, the head of the family, was sent off by his father to Enological College, and he became the first aristocrat winemaker. So not just a wealthy patrician Italian landowner who happened to have some vineyards, but actually the man in the vineyard, the man with his hands in the soil, making the wines, growing the grapes, etc. And after Enological College, he was sent down to their good friends, the Incisa della Rocchetta family, who you will know from Tenuta San Guido, who we talked about in our last tasting, in fact, when we were trying the Guidalberto. And young Carlo, was there at the time that Sassicaia was born, and he made the first vintages with the legendary Giacomo Takis, one of Italy's most famous and revered winemakers. And then Carlo took Giacomo with him back up to Trentino to start making San Leonardo, and using the blueprint that they had found in with Sassicaia in San Guido, so using Bordeaux varieties, specifically Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc, or was it Cabernet Franc? We shall deal with that shortly. But anyway, as far as they were concerned, it was the classic left bank Bordeaux blend, which, starting from the first vintage in 1982, San Leonardo has remained almost, I think, unchanged every year. The blend has been 60% Cabernet Sauvignon, and then 20 to 25% Merlot, and 15 to 20% what they thought was Cabernet Franc, which we'll come on to shortly. We will talk more about the Grand Vin of the estate anon, because right now we're sort of doing an introduction with what is their Merlot-based cuvee. So this isn't so much the second wine of San Leonardo, because it's a very different blend from the two wines from San Leonardo that we'll try subsequently. This is a very different blend. This is Merlot based for starters. So whereas San Leonardo is Cabernet Sauvignon based, this is 90% Merlot and 10% what they thought was Cabernet Franc. In fact, I might as well tell you, because otherwise it'll get boring. It's Carmenere. It's Carmenere, basically. So what they thought was Cabernet Franc turned out to be Carmenere. And they didn't tell anyone for years because they didn't think they could or should. It wasn't, again, it wasn't part of the DOC rules. Not that it is a DOC wine. Anyway, Carmenere is not sort of officially all that terribly legal in Italy. So they just put Cabernet Franc on the label for years and years and years. Anyway, this is not a solitary example of people, winemakers estates thinking that they had one grape and they had another one. A very classic example, of course, is in Chile, where they too, Rajesh just pointing out there, here we go. So in Chile, this was the other great example. A lot of the largely Italian diaspora that happened both in the 1800s and 1900s, taking over grapes, when a lot of Chilean Merlot that was planted contained a lot of Carmenere vines as well. So you often got what was effectively a field blend. And it was really only in the 90s, and I think we dealt with this at a previous tasting, that there started to be the recognition that there were two grapes. There was Merlot and there was Carmenere. And exactly the same thing with San Leonardo. So Rajesh, Carmenere is very much not extinct. No, it's alive and well, and there's plenty of it. You might just not know that you have it. That seems to be the challenge. But certainly, since I think 2011, I think it's 2011. I have to check the actual bottles, because the bottles used to have, the old labels used to have the grapes written on them. Now, or certainly on the back, and it used to say Cabernet Franc, and it changed. They started admitting it was Carmenere, which gives a really interesting sort of pepperiness, spiciness, herbaceous edge to the fruit, which is otherwise 90% Merlot in the case of the Villagresti. So mine's already beginning to open up rather nicely in the glass. 2014 was quite a cool and damp year. It was a cool, damp winter, followed by a cool, damp spring, and a fairly cool, damp summer. So everything about the vintage was really quite restrained, quite herbal, quite green. You didn't get lots and lots of ripe fruit. However, with San Leonardo, you never get lots and lots of ripe fruit. The wines are remarkably restrained, remarkably elegant, and remarkably consistent. In fact, Jancis Robinson says, alongside saying San Leonardo is surely the most successful Bordeaux blend in northern Italy, she also calls it surely the most consistent winery in the world. And it's true. If you try their wines, that there's always something recognizably San Leonardo about them. And the brilliant thing is that the alcohol since 1982 to the current vintage 2015 has never varied more than half a degree between 13 and 13.5%. There's not one example of it being over, irrespective of how hot the vintage gets. Now, to be fair, in certain vintages, hot vintages, San Leonardo doesn't produce a Grand Vin, and we'll come on to that. We'll come on to that later. So just getting my nose in here. You're getting that sort of cooler climate Merlot nose for sure. And then a little bit of that peppery green herbal Carmenere coming out as well. One of the rather lovely things about San Leonardo is the length of time that the wines are forced to age. So in the case of the Grand Vin, it's 4 years in barriques, and in the case of the Villagresti, it's actually slightly less. It's 3 years. However, the 2014 is the current vintage of Villagresti on the market. So what's really good is that although these wines are quite cool and quite, intense tannic structure and good grippy acidity, when they're released on the market, you can start to tackle them almost straight away. The estate itself, if you want to locate yourself, is just on the to the north of Lake Garda. You bomb up the Autostrada 22 and you get past Lake Garda, and then you bear right, and it's here in Trentino, and it's far and away the most important winery in north of Lake Garda for sure. And it's a beautiful old chateau. It looks like a Bordeaux chateau. In fact, it looks like a Bordeaux chateau that's been sort of picked up and plonked on the northern shores of Lake Garda. And the Villagresti is named after Marchese Carlo's grandmother, the Countess Gemma di Gresi, who was very famous. You could look her up. She's a remarkable lady. She was responsible for the repatriation of a large number of Italian prisoners of war after the First World War, and she won all sorts of human rights awards and recognition for her work in this area. And this wine is a tribute to the Marchese's grandmother. The history of the estate goes back a long way. There's evidence of winemaking right back in terms of the 9th, 10th century. There are the Roman frescoes in the beautiful little chapel that were there. Right on the back of the vineyards, there's even the old Roman way to cross the Alps from Rome or Roman-held territory into Gaul, and that's still the path that you would have taken on your heavily laden donkey across the Alps, whatever the weather. So it's hugely historical, and also at the same time got a very, very bright and exciting future ahead of it. Now, are there any comments on the Villagresti? Because we're sticking with San Leonardo, so I can carry on the commentary. We'll move on to the 2013 Grand Vin, but just some initial impressions, comments, always welcome. Oh, I've just seen Karen saying, colleague is doing a harvest with Carmenere in Oregon right now. Okay. Well, why not, frankly? Cooler climate Carmenere, Oregon. I bet that's tasty. Single variety wines or blends. Carmenere on its own, I tend to find, can be a little astringent, but you never know. Maybe they're blending with Pinot Noir. That would be vile, but anyway. Okay, well, whilst we're warming up a bit, then let's move on to the San Leonardo 13. I can carry on my adulation of this estate. Right. Okay. Oh, good. Oh God, I love that nose. So, 2013 in Italy is, generally speaking, a very good vintage. But what's quite interesting is it's quite a cool vintage. So there've been a number of properly solar years across Europe, but 2013 it certainly wasn't cold and it wasn't wet, but it was a cooler vintage, which has obviously led to wonderful ripeness, wonderful sophistication. For me, 13 is an absolutely classic classic San Leonardo vintage. And it's already beginning to show quite well, but this is a wine which you could comfortably leave till 2040, 2045. These wines really do age like great claret, to which they have been compared on in numerous occasions. I remember doing a blind tasting with Pichon Baron, on San Leonardo, 10 vintages of each, the same vintages, and it was quite fascinating how often it was possible to get it wrong, particularly with the younger vintages. I think with age, that Carmenere component begins to kind of push through that peppery spiciness, but this wonderful consistency, this real Bordelais character, a bit like Sassicaia. They still make San Leonardo in the way that they used to make Bordeaux. The temperature control in the cellars, when you ask Anselmo, Carlo's son, if it's a bit hot, they open the door wider. If it gets a bit cold, they close it. That's it. It's very old school. They only use 25% new wood in the barriques, so it's 75% second, third, fourth year. And that means that you're not getting a lot of very toasty, creamy, New World style fruit, or even Tuscan style. If we've tried Tuscan style Merlots and Cabernets in the past, this is markedly different. This is far more akin to Bordeaux than Bulgari. I think I've used that before in a probably in an email offer, but yeah, it's absolutely true. I rather like that. If you think of San Leonardo, think of that. The comparison is much more to Bordeaux, to Saint Julien maybe, than it is to Bulgari and Suveretto and Tuscany. I'm just having a little. Oh, gotta have a little taste here. Wow. So this, if you like, proper old school claret, decent wines with finesse, with structure, with elegance, with purity, with definition, then San Leonardo is definitely a wine to add to the portfolio. The 2013 here was a 96 pointer from the Wine Advocates Monocolana, which is the second highest scoring wine from the estate. The 2015, which we're offering at the moment, which is a much more solar vintage, as we've discussed previously, that's hovering at 95 to 97 points, which rivals the legendary 2004 vintage San Leonardo at 97 points. So we're definitely dealing with one of the top vintages from the estate. But once again, this is a wine where ideally one would be drinking the 05, 06, well, 07s, maybe 08s. They didn't make a 9, they didn't make a 12. I think when it gets too hot, by and large, San Leonardo prefers to keep the fruit for their Terre di San Leonardo. And for them it's all about elegance and finesse. So often, I'll be honest, I talk to winemakers from let's say Barossa or Napa or even in Tuscany, and I'm presented with a nigh on 15% fruit bomb, which is sort of 200% new oak, and I'm told by the winemaker or by the estate owner, yeah, we love wines with finesse and elegance. Now, pardon my French, but that is bollocks. It's just not true. It just isn't true. And I think you need to taste a wine like San Leonardo to fully appreciate what elegance means, what finesse means, what ensuring that you have a balance between structure and freshness and aromatic complexity versus going for very ripe forward jammy fruit. And I think San Leonardo, like the best Bordeaux chateaus, like wines like Leoville Barton, for example, in San Julien, like Lynch Barge in Pauillac, wines which really genuinely prefer to go for finesse. They're not to say they're not big wines, but they are wines which are much more than just fruit. David and Wendy, where is this located? This is just to the north of Lake Garda, a few miles further up, between Rovereto. Rovereto is the nearest town, and Avio. It's actually on a little road between Rovereto and Avio, just to the north of Lake Garda. It's we're in the sort of the lower hills of the Dolomites, and if you keep going up the Autostrada, you get into Alto Adige, into the South Tyrol, into the sort of German-speaking part of Italy, that wonderful hinterland between Austria and northern Italy, where you have sort of strudel and pasta, and people wear lederhosen. It's quite remarkable. But here you're a little bit further south, but you are getting it's quite cool in the evenings, but warm in the night, warm during the days. San Leonardo benefits from almost the same sort of sunlight hours as Rome. However, it's much cooler in the evening, which again helps preserve the aromatic freshness, the acidity, keeps the wine, well, again, elegance and finesse. Really is. I'm finding currently the 13's really beginning to open up in the glass quite nicely. There's a slightly sort of sweeter, more plummy, sort of licoricey fruit beginning to emerge. So the one sad thing about these tastings with our lovely test tubes is, I've just about, by the time this glass is finished, that last sip will just about be hitting its stride, and you'll wish you had, at least a magnum or a double magnum to see off the evening. But maybe we'll do that next time. We'll do double magnum tastings for when depth of winter, lockdown has really hit. Good, excellent. Adam's a fan. Good. Glad to hear it. We'll return to San Leonardo in a bit. In fact, right at the end, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the story, about the kind of what's going on currently with the estate, some of the accolades they've won, some of the press, etc. But for once, I've actually got two glasses with me this evening, and if you can do that, I'd suggest leaving that 13 and grabbing yourself another glass, because it would be quite interesting as we move on now to the Brunello 2013 to be able to do a bit of a horizontal comparison between two wines from this excellent vintage, but from two very different regions, two different grapes, two different producers. So I'll give you a few minutes to run around and get spare glasses. Oh good, there's a little bit of that left, but I might have to give that to Teresa, so I'll just keep what I've got in my glass. But yeah, it's going to be a real treat trying the 01 as well. I am probably, I haven't done this before, but I'm actually going to open up my 01 now, just to let it get a little bit of air in it. Wow, that's smelling good. Okay. Right. Okay. So, Valdicava Brunello 13. Huh. Looking at my my test tubes this evening, I noticed that some of you might be feeling horribly shortchanged, because we've only got one wine over 13.5%, and that is the Madonna del Piano 2012, which is 14%. When I compare it to the tasting we did the previous session, where all those the Tuscan wines were 14.5%, certainly the US wines were easily knocking on 15%'s door. Yes, I apologize for the for those of you, as I said, who feel rather shortchanged by the lack of alcohol tonight. Right. Ooh, nice. So, okay, Valdicava. Valicarva is another historical estate. Fascinating place, fascinating people. Vincenzo Abruzzazi, who's the owner, his father was one of the leaders of the original consortio of 50 producers in Montalcino when it was founded, and back in the 50s, 60s. I should check that. Anyway, he was one of the original producers. Montalcino now has several hundred producers, and it's just because you see Brunello on a bottle doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good wine. And yet, if you're looking for consistency from a wine region, certainly in Italy, I've mentioned this before, but no other region has given me as much, consistent, unalloyed pleasure as Montalcino. Brunello wines are just fabulous. They are the ultimate expression of Sangiovese. There are notable examples from elsewhere, of course, from Chianti, from bits, well, no, not really the Maremma, truth be told, from Montepulciano, but really where Sangiovese reaches its apex is here in Montalcino. And perhaps the reason it does is, well, there's several reasons, but firstly, that the clone of Sangiovese that is used in Montalcino is a very particular clone of Sangiovese called Sangiovese Grosso, and as in fat Sangiovese. And it's not that the grape is a large grape, no, quite the reverse. It's the skin is very thick. So what this gives you, of course, is quite a high concentration of tannins and color. The Sangiovese grape is variously going to give you some color, but not so much. It's going to give you some tannins, but not so much. But Sangiovese Grosso from Montalcino definitely gives you the building blocks to make pretty big, rich, structured wines. So I'm just going to have a quick sniff here, the 13. Oh, love it. Beginning to evolve already. Now, Sangiovese, as we might have tried in previous tastings, has this character of being quite ferrous, quite Icarus, quite bloody. It's like you've kind of cut your tongue on a rusty knife. It's that taste. It's the taste of the blood and rust, and obviously, hopefully alongside some good fruit too. This sort of sour cherry fruit, and yeah, this earthy character. This, it's for me, it's the taste of Tuscany. I absolutely love it. And Valdicarva, one of the top producers. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the tasting that, well, maybe I didn't, but I'll mention again now. But Robert Parker said that Valdicarva deserves to be thought of as in the top 3 producers in Montalcino, and that was probably 15 years ago at least. From which they have now utterly, they're definitely, indisputably in the top 3, and we don't always have to look at points, but they're quite helpful to see how wines are rated and judged by their peers. And the 2013 got a pretty respectable 98 points from James Suckling, who, as we know, is fairly generous with his points. But 98 is 98 is impressive. But what's more important to recognize is that Valdicarva, that was the highest score he gave any wines in Montalcino in 2013, which is universally regarded as being the best vintage in Montalcino after 2010. It's only been since 2015 came along that we've had arguably a better vintage than 10. 2015 we released this year. So 2013 is a great vintage. I mentioned earlier in relation to San Leonardo that it's not a hot year, which is refreshing, but it was a wonderfully balanced vintage, and it allowed a harvest which was at times 2 to 3 weeks longer than the average, which is why you get this extraordinary complexity and depth and amazing character in the wine. It's a proper Brunello. It's a sort of Brunello which hugely excites me, I have to say, and hopefully everyone. But anyway, so the point is, it got 98 points from James Suckling, which was, you know, the highest score he gave any Brunellos that particular vintage. I was doing a little bit of research earlier today, you know, looking at other critics and the comparisons of the vintage. And it's quite interesting that whilst you've got James Suckling saying, I'm just going to get a couple of quotes here for you, that the 2013 Brunellos are far better balanced than the overrated 2011s and deeper and more penetrating than the 2012s. So James Suckling definitely is all out for the 13s. Ian Daggetter, who was the former Tuscan wine writer for Anthony Galloni's Venus. He's now left. It's now a guy called Eric Guido, but he was saying that 2013 was uniformly good. And he makes this really interesting point that normally the cooler vintages like 2008 favor the more southerly terroirs in Montalcino, which can be up to 5 degrees hotter. That's the difference in temperature across Montalcino. And therefore, or rather conversely, the much hotter vintages can benefit the more northern estates like 2011. 2013, and this is a good tip for you, is you know, you can buy almost with impunity. It was a homogeneous year in terms of quality. Everyone made really, really good wines. Good. Okay. And Vincenzo Abruzzazi himself said that his 2013s were the best Brunellos he'd made since 2010. So, you know, we're really looking at a properly good wine. All that having been said, I still think this is very young. I would love to be sitting on this for another 3 or 4 years, or at the very least I'd be giving it a proper decant, a really sort of ungracious whirl around in the old the old decanter to get it properly opened up. But you know, ideally, you know, great Brunello is like great Bordeaux. You know, keep buying the ones you love, so that you can drink the ones which are ready to drink, and you don't have to drink the latest ones that we're selling you, frankly. No, I'm lucky enough to have bottles of the 99, the 2001, 2004. I mean, sadly, literally single bottles, maybe 1 or 2. Otherwise I'd, you know, offer to share them all with you, but I'm not going to. So I'm just going to have them on my own, locked away in my study. So a couple of things going on the chat there. How much is this, please? Angus or Luke, would you do the honors at some point and just pop in the prices of the 13? In fact, maybe we could just put in all the prices of the Valdicarva in the chat. We've managed to collect a pretty spectacular ex-estate selection of vintages. I you know, as a rule, Honest Grapes, we don't hold stocks of wines, or certainly not big stocks, but we've managed to get a nice collection of back vintages of Valdicarva because I just love the wine so much. So convince Nathan it's worth spending the money having them and then drinking them. Rajesh asking, what's the time to release 5 years? So Brunello legally must be aged for 4 years prior to release, and the Reserva for 5. So the current Brunello release is 2015. That's the current release, which is absolutely spectacular. 2015 in Italy has been an incredible year. The 2015 San Leonardo is absolutely spectacular, potentially their best ever. As I said, it rivals the best ever scoring 2004. And certainly 2015 Brunello is, there's every indication that it will surpass 2010, which was the new benchmark, which itself surpass 2001, which was the new benchmark after 97. So, you know, the quality level in Montalcino is just going up and up and up. And how long would I age this? I suggested personally, I would leave this 2 years at least, maybe 3 to 4. But then I have the luxury of a few bottles at least of older vintages in the cellar. I do think you can drink it now, but ideally we would give this a little bit more time, a couple more years. But you know, that's sort of a personal taste thing and a personal circumstances thing. If you're enjoying it now, then just make sure you buy 12 bottles rather than 6, so that you can drink some of them now and keep the rest for later. Amazing producer. When I first met Vincenzo, we'll move on to the we'll move on to the Reserva, the Madonna del Piano Reserva 2012 now, and I'll just carry on talking about Vincenzo and Abruzzazi and Valdicarva. So yeah, sorry, it's the 2012 Madonna del Piano we're doing next. So whilst we're pouring that, just to continue, I remember first meeting Vincenzo 15 years ago, I guess, and it was quite funny because Valdicarva is pretty much one of the very first Brunello estates that you come to when you're driving south down to the region, and you sort of enter, you go past the sign which says Montalcino, and you know, I've been told about Valdicava. I've been told it was a legend, and oh my god, you know, it's going to be an incredible experience for you to go and taste and try. And I saw this quite I don't know, garish, no, not garish, but certainly modern, rather fancy, large building on my left as I was driving in, and I thought, well, that must be Valdicava. And it turns out that was actually the consortio. There was sort of like a Brunello consortio building and offices and winery, and I had completely driven past the small, I won't say tumble down, but if you've ever sort of saw Le Pin in Pomerol before the refurb, you know, I mean, it was, you know, the washing hanging on the line outside. It was, you know, it wasn't exactly an impressive edifice. And, you know, you go in and it's a big barn. It's a big barn with these old barrels. Vincenzo Abruzzazi was probably the first vigneron I met who sort of really imparted to me the importance of biodiversity, the importance of, you know, they do follow a number of biodynamic principles, although I don't think they're totally biodynamic. But you know, it was the first vineyard I'd been to where, you know, it was running wild with grasses and seeds and, you know, flowers through the vines. You know, everything else I'd seen prior to that had been, you know, absolutely plowed and tilled to within an inch past its life. So, you know, it was fascinating meeting a winemaker who understood that the way to get the most out of the soil was to respect it and to let life grow and to nurture the flora and fauna and bees and birds, etc., etc. So, you know, a singularly unimpressive edifice full of some of the most incredible wines I had ever tried. And you know, it's always a stopping off point when I'm in Tuscany. I think Graham is on the call this evening. Yeah, so Graham, you were there just last summer, I believe, in fact. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty special place, isn't it? Yeah. And you know, it's definitely very understandable why people like myself, I think, fall in love with Montalcino when you try Valdicarva's wines. So we've now got in the glass the 2012 Reserva, the Madonna del Piano, and this is a very limited selection wine from a particular vineyard site slightly further up the hill, in which there is this tiny little chapel, which has on it, or in it I should say, a fresco with the picture that adorns the label on the bottle. Now, obviously, I was looking around to hold up the bottle, but of course we don't have it. We've got the test tube. So, but if you look on our website and you look at the Valdicarva labels, you'll see this sort of rather, again, garish looking cherub on the front of the labels. And this is the cherub or seraphim, as I'm led to believe, that appears on the fresco in the Chiesa di Madonna, Chiesa di Madonna del Piano, in the little church, and it's tiny in the little chapel in the vineyard. So that's the name that they give to their top sort of single vineyard selection Reserva. And I think this is such a fascinating comparison to try the 2013 estate wine and the previous vintage of the reserve wine. Now, 2012 is a fascinating vintage in Montalcino. I remember when it came out, there was there was a degree of concern because 2012 was a really, really hot year. I mentioned earlier, San Leonardo didn't make 2012. It was too hot for them. They didn't want to. And it came on the back of another really hot year, 2011. And if you try 2011 Brunelli, they are not particularly sophisticated. They are very, very almost burnt ripe fruit. I mean, it's there's a lack of elegance, shall we say. And yet 2012 as a vintage, looking at the year, was similarly hot. I mean, you had heat spikes, particularly in the southern areas, which were well over 100 degrees. It was hot, hot, hot. And yet somehow the wines themselves from the better producers absolutely rocked. And in fact, James Suckling called 2012 the rock star vintage. So these are not shy wines. And this is the only wine this evening which carries 14% alcohol. So it's clearly got the ripeness of the vintage. However, I think the key difference was that everyone picked about a week earlier in 2012 than they did in 2011, and that helped preserve some of the acidity, some of the freshness, and avoided this kind of slightly burnt, overripe, jammy character you find in the 11s. Now, it's certainly a richer, denser style than the 2013, but then also this is a Reserva. And for me, it's interesting that, I mentioned how James Suckling speaks very highly of the 13 vintage. Ian Daggeter, his sort of compatriot at Venus, speaks very highly of the 2012. And his comments here I thought were really interesting. So Ian says of the 2012 Reservas from Montalcino, he says this. He says, they are everything Brunello Reservas should be, but rarely are. As in deeper, bigger, and more complex wines than the Classico bottlings, with a mellow aspect given their extra time and oxygenation in mostly large used oak barrels. And I think that's exactly what you get here. And it's no surprise, this was one of only 3 wines from the vintage to get 98 points, again, from James Suckling. But it also got the highest score that Ian Daggeter has ever given Valdicarva, second highest score, to be fair, 95 plus for Valdicarva's wine. So clearly, it's quite interesting that there's some alignment in at least the quality of Valdicarva, even if different critics have slightly different opinions on the relative merits of the 13 and 12 vintage. It's quite good that what, for me, comes through very clearly is Valdicarva outperforms the vintage in both cases. Now this is just gorgeous. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. But this, wow. I mean, this has some tannins. This has some power behind it. I can certainly see critics' points that the 13 has. You notice the coolness of the vintage by comparison here. This definitely has a real a real oomph to it. You know, this we need our, you know, cinghiali ragu. We need our bistecca alla fiorentina with this one. You know, this is a big wine, but it's thrilling. I mean, it really is. And I would put it in drinking window terms. In drinking window terms, I would say you probably could start to tackle it now. You know, the ripeness, the richness, the density, the power is starting to mellow slightly and evolve. But at the same time, I don't think there's any hurry to drink this. You know, the 2013 Reserva wines were the last vintage to be released as a Reserva. I haven't seen any 14 Reserva, because 14 in Montalcino was, generally speaking, a bit of a weak vintage. So 13, we actually have the 13 Madonna del Piano as well, which I have to say is a staggeringly good wine too. But that's literally been, we released it last month, I think. So you know, that's very new. But yeah, I think this is a super exciting wine. And as Ian Daggett says, it's a very good example of what a Brunello Reserva should be. You know, it's why you pay the extra money. It's why you keep it for longer. It's why it is kept for longer, in order to come up with a flavor profile like this. Okay. Oh, so we're sticking with Valdicava, and we're going to do 2005 now. So if we can get that one ready. Great question from Jamie. How did I discover them? Back in the days when I sort of set up my first unsuccessful wine business, it must be said. Unsuccessful in that it didn't survive, but you know, very successful in the fact that I met wonderful winemakers like Carlo and his son Anselmo, and like Vincenzo, and you know, I met them at tastings. I love the wines. I you know, love the families, love the stories, and you know, took a bit of a punt, I suppose, on supporting them as they were getting more established in the UK. And you know, I guess you know, you reap the rewards, frankly, because they remember those days when you were out championing them, when they were less, you know, less kind of stellar, and they're not, you know, they weren't necessarily, you know, in the top 3 producers in Montalcino, or in San Leonardo's case, you know, the finest Northern Italian Bordeaux blend, and you know, the 2-time winner of best wine of Italy from Finanza, you know. And so yeah, it's great to it's great to kind of grow with them, really. It's you know, it's great being there in the early days, frankly. And you know, that relationship, those relationships still are very important. You know, it's great discovering wines now, Jamie, which could be the San Leonardos and the Valdicarvas of the future. You know, that's equally exciting. You know, and I think we've got a couple. In fact, I know we've got a couple. But you know, you never know. And by, you know, becoming great successes, I doesn't necessarily mean commercial successes, doesn't even necessarily mean huge critical points, but nevertheless, you know, wines which you can bring to an audience and they get them. They just go, yeah, fine, okay, yeah, I kind of get it, you know. So yeah, good question. So now we're going to try what I would say is a fully the last 2 wines this evening are properly evolved, and I'm not even sure on any of the tastings we've done thus far we've really done wines which are sort of at their peak of maturity. So you know, hopefully this should be really quite interesting, because you'll see a marked change in the style of the wines. And obviously, you know, there's various commentary around around what has caused that and why. So 2005. Mm. So spicy. Thank you, Julia. Very spicy. A little bit a touch barnyardy, that kind of, you know, old Burgundy mild notes coming up, but definitely spicy. Really quite kind of balsamic tones. The fruit is very much compote fruit. It's sort of, you know, spicy prunes, plums in a bit of syrup maybe. But you know what I love, what I really love, is that even despite that evolution, there's still that kind of slightly minty eucalyptic freshness note on the nose as well. There's still, it's not like it's got old and withered and died. You know, it's got wisdom, not just wrinkles. You know, it's definitely maintaining a real sort of balance and energy. That's what I like, is the energy to the wine. Mm. Mm. Ah, now this is, I think, at full evolution. You know, this is showing all of that sort of slight kind of juniper gamey notes, which makes it absolutely perfect with game. You know, if you're having a slow roast haunch of venison, or you know, a really nice sort of game stew, you know, you're nailing a few pigeons or partridge or whatever's been flying over wherever you happen to be residing currently, then, you know, a good spicy mature Brunello is a perfect alternative, and often a lot cheaper than the sort of equivalent from Burgundy in terms of age and evolution. So, you know, yeah, I think this is, oh yeah. And there's a slight sort of licoricey note, a slight sort of rubber plant. I mean, it's yeah, it's properly where it should be right now. 2005 was not a particularly heralded vintage in Burgundy. You know, it was the problem for 2005. It wasn't that it was too cold or too hot, but it was punctuated by quite a lot of rain generally, in fact, and particularly just before the harvest and even during the harvest. You know, it was quite a damp vintage. So depending on who you speak to in Montalcino, some people said, oh, it was really cold. Others say it was really hot, but everyone agrees it was pretty damp. You know, and that means that there is a degree of, you know, it's not as concentrated, anywhere near as concentrated. If you go back to that 2012, if you've got any left, then, you know, you'll see a completely different vintage. This is much kind of sort of, you know, spicier, more like Northern Rhone, more sort of Northern Rhone like. This is sort of, you know, like a you know, Cornas or something like that. It's got that definite spice, gamey, kind of earthy character. Rajesh asking, how did you pick these wines for the tasting? Well, we had a few different vintages to, I mean, not a huge number, but we had a few different vintages to choose from between San Leonardo and Valdicava. I knew I wanted to concentrate on these two producers, and then it was what would make an interesting tasting. And I thought, if we can compare the excellent 2013 vintage, but from obviously two different regions, if we can look at the very contrasting 2012 and 2013 in Montalcino, and if we can do a fully mature Valdicarva vintage as another kind of comparison, that would be interesting. And obviously the 01 San Leonardo we will finish with, again, similarly maturing, but by no means mature, but maturing San Leonardo. And then we thought we'd put in the Villagresti to begin with, just so we could fit within budget, basically, because these are pretty expensive wines. But also, you know, I wanted to show more than one expression from the same estate. So, you know, with the Valdicava, we have the Estate Brunello and the Reserva. With San Leonardo, we have the Merlot-based cuvee, and then the, you know, the Grand Vin, the San Leonardo itself. Yes, very good question. Thank you, Karen, for pointing that out. Indeed, it was. So let's move on to the San Leonardo 01. Just as we are pouring that glass, I would say, for me, the 05 Valdicarva is a great example of a really good wine. Or let's put it this way: you know, it's not a great vintage 05, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a really good wine. You know, I think that's a really delicious, you know, very engaging wine, and it goes to show you that, you know, good growers can still and should still produce interesting, if not compelling, wines, even in the trickier vintages. And I think we're finishing on a high, I have to say. We are finishing on a high, that's for sure. If you stick your nose in this, if you stick your nose in this wine, and tell me honestly, if you didn't know you were drinking San Leonardo, if you told me that you could absolutely immediately plant yourself in Italy, I would call you all liars. I would call you all liars. You know, this is why San Leonardo has the reputation it does, because, you know, this is the nose of Bordeaux. This is a Bordeaux nose. This is not a Tuscan Bordeaux blend. This is not a Australian, Californian, Chilean, Argentinian Bordeaux blend. You know, this smells like Bordeaux. The only giveaway, if you could call it that, is that slight pepperiness, perhaps, from the Carmenere. But you know, this is honestly why I was lucky enough to be involved in organizing a 20 vintage vertical of San Leonardo at 10 Trinity Square the year before last. And I mean, the great and good of the UK wine world were all invited: Hugh Johnson, Jancis Robinson, Stephen Spurrier, Michael Broadbent, you know, dear departed Michael Broadbent. I mean, literally the absolute, you know, top of the tree of the UK wine writing fraternity. And it was absolutely fascinating, because some of the people in the room knew San Leonardo quite well, others just didn't at all. And it was extraordinary watching the reactions around the room as people tried these wines. You know, with vintages going back to 1995, I think we went back. Oh no, 1990. Went back as far as 1990, and yeah, just for me now, smelling this, yes, you're getting much more mature notes, red cherry, still fresh red cherry there, but you know, this is a wine which Monica Lana at the Wine Advocates, giving a perfectly respectable 95 plus points to, still suggests, and I totally agree with her, that this is a wine you can comfortably be drinking in 15 plus years. You know, so it is maturing, but it is not mature. The Valdicarva 05 we had, which again, sorry to keep laboring this point, but you know, okay, 2005 was not the greatest year in Montalcino, but Valdicarva was the highest scored Brunello from James Suckling in the vintage. 01 is a great vintage for for San Leonardo, and yet the wine, despite being 4 years older, for me is still, yeah, I mean, it's entering its middle age, but it's got plenty left to go. Mm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's just got that succulence, but that sort of lead pencil note that you expect from great Saint Julien and Pauillac. That refinement, the elegance of the tannins. It's they don't make wine like this anywhere else, even in Bordeaux these days. In fact, they are starting to make wine like this in Bordeaux again, but it's taken a long time to get back there. A number of estates, they're now pulling back on the new oak. They're picking earlier. They are deliberately going for less extraction. If you're interested and do some reading around what's been written about San Leonardo by literally all the top critics in the last 5 years, you'll see they are all, unanimous in their praise of the consistency of the wines, the finesse and elegance of the wines, and the fact that you can try the vintages from the 90s and you recognize a very clear relationship between all of them, irrespective of the character of the vintage. This consistency is unrivaled by any other estate in the world. I'm hugely biased because I love the wines, I love the family, but it's not just me saying that. Honestly, Wine Advocate, James Suckling, Venus, Jancis Robinson. I mean, they are all unanimous in this praise. So I'm getting very carried away. I apologize, but Jamie, well, Jamie again, less good comment this time, but fair enough, it has to be dealt with. So no, it's a fair price. So San Leonardo has been, ludicrously underpriced for years and years and years and years, and yet, speaking to Anselmo Guerri Gonzaga, Carlo's son, there is definitely a plan to start repositioning the wine, but it's not going to be crazy. We're talking 10% probably every 3 vintages, that sort of thing. They're not greedy people, they are wonderful people, in fact. But yeah, it's incredible wine. We are, sadly, as Luke's pointing out, we use our last bottles of 01 for this tasting. However, if you like this, wine, the 13 is going to be in the same style. The 15, which we are offering now, you're going to have to wait a little bit, but my God, just phenomenal. The 14 is definitely worth checking out. That will drink a bit earlier, but anyway, if we've got 10, we'll be getting in some. I think we've got some 7. The 7 is phenomenal right now. They really are just fabulous wines. So yeah, I do enjoy that. I'll get off my soapbox now, but yeah, such good wines. So yes, Karen, you need to bulk buy now, as in the next 20 seconds. I expect orders for 17 cases each of Magnums, and that will suffice. But yeah. So there we go. Look, we've run almost to time in terms of me chuntering on. I'm quite conscious that well, I hope I've answered questions and responded to comments, but obviously I'd really like your feedback now, your thoughts. Anything you haven't put in the chat, please do. If you want to just unmute yourself and talk, then please do. Gives me a chance to carry on drinking, frankly. Good. Someone's up.
And Tom, I would say, after the visit to the estate last year, so welcoming, the time they gave to us, they said the history, the chapel, visit the ground, and to go through. And I'm fully committed. I enjoyed looking at my cellar, like to see that I'm covering, 5 of the 6 that we've got here. He thoroughly enjoyed it. And actually, the 01 I haven't drunk before is amazing. And I'm if anybody gets a chance to go, they're fantastic. Yeah.
Brilliant. No, Graham, thank you. Of course. Yes, I forgot you've been there last year as well.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. They are that we have very good relationships with these 2 estates, and they are very welcoming to any friends of ours. You will have a great time. You'll drink amazing wines. we will be putting in orders at both estates quite soon, because we've been selling the most recent vintages. You know, the 2015 vintages from both San Leonardo and Valdicava are quite genuinely up there, if not the best, but up there with the best. I think they probably are the best. So, you know, if you don't have them, then you should do. But what we will be doing alongside shipping the new vintages, we always get a little cheeky back vintage parcel. We'll put in a few cases of the older vintages so that we can do tastings like this, because you know, I think it's important that you are able to try the wines when they are a little more, or in the case of the 05 Valdicava, fully evolved. But yeah, anyone heading out there, well, I guess Italy, who knows, but you know, as and when we can, that it's worth quarantining, frankly. It's worth quarantining for, but yeah, good.
Could I ask, typically, how much lead time do they require for setting up such a trip?
Oh, gosh, I mean, yeah, to be perfectly honest, if you tell us you're in the area, you know, and they've got a slot, I'm sure they'd be delighted to make time. You know, especially right now, to be perfectly honest, right now, you know, the winery doors are more open than they tend to be. But you know, honestly, let us know. Let us know when you're interested, and we'll be delighted to organise a you know, time to go visit, for sure. Totally worth it. Oh, I should say, whilst and obviously, please, for those who need to leave and go eat, you must. But for those who want to stay on, just back to San Leonardo's history. You know, we've mentioned the chapel with the frescoes. In fact, both of them have a nice chapel with frescoes, frankly. You know, but you know, it's an extraordinarily historical estate, San Leonardo, for reasons that aren't even related to wine whatsoever. So they have a brilliant museum at the estate where Marchese Carlo has a massive love for vintage tractors. So he's got an incredible collection of vintage tractors, and they have a sort of a rally once a year where all the winery staff, many of the winery staff have been working for the San Leonardo estate for at least 10 generations. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. But anyway, also in the wonderful museum and library, you know, there's bits and pieces of history that, you know, quite apart from the Roman road going across the Alps and stuff, and the Roman frescoes and Gemma di Gresti, San Leonardo was where the German high command surrendered prior to signing the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War. It was where Ludendorff and the generals came out of the hills, and it was where they had the armistice. The armistice was agreed at San Leonardo before then they went off to Versailles to actually sign it officially. And then you flash forward to the Second World War, and chillingly, you know, you see pictures in the museum. It was the Nazi HQ for northern Italy. You know, once the Italians capitulated, it was the Nazi HQ. So you know, it's an incredible place to visit. You know, and then you've got the wine. So yes, do go, please. Let us know when you want to go, and we'll sort it out.
They're putting out some wonderful content on Instagram at the moment, and Instagram Live. They're working through the harvest and that, and you can see a lot of the history and the process there.
Yeah, and actually, just to update the story, Anselmo married. Oh gosh, a few years ago. When did Italy win the World Cup in Italy? The football. It was. Someone who knows about football. No, anyway, whenever they did.
It was 1990. It was in Italy, yeah. But I think
no. Maybe it wasn't in Italy.
They lost in that final.
No, it was when Italy won the World Cup. Maybe it wasn't in Italy. No, but anyway, whenever they last won the World Cup,
lost the World Cup in.
Yep, Mike. Well, what's yep? No.
We lost the World Cup in. They lost the World Cup in 1990.
1990.
1990.
Yeah.
No, it
I
wasn't
need
it.
to find out. We'll find out in a sec.
Maybe 2006, Tom.
Bingo. Thank you, Angus.
So
Exactly.
I'm wondering whether the whole
No, so that's right. In 2006, when Italy won the World Cup, that night, Anselmo got married to his lovely, lovely wife in Rome. It was an incredible wedding. The night that Italy won the World Cup. But his wife's father was the former, and at the time he was the head of Pirelli. And the marriage of these two dynasties, the very old aristocratic Guerrieri Gonzaga family, who's, they date back to the sort of, 1100s, and the Pirelli family was very, very dynamic because it gave a much welcome sort of injection of both capital, but also, I think, modernity, to the estate, and that has been hugely useful in powering forward the opportunities the estates have. So yeah, all good fun. All good fun. Good. Gosh.
well, there's a lot of meeting of dynasties, isn't it? They do with the wineries. It's a whole legacy, and the meeting of two different dynasties is quite common, isn't it, with Bordeaux and such like.
Well, and actually, I mean, I think in so many industries, in so many circumstances, generally in life, that blend of old and new always leads. It's an amazing catalyst for something exciting to result, and much to be enjoyed. There's also the same thing you find in wine with generational change. I think that's something which is super important in a lot of wine regions, or with a lot of estates where they've got great opportunity, but the current generation has a certain way of doing things, a certain a methodology, and it doesn't want to change. And I think I look in Burgundy in particular, and maybe Bordeaux to a degree, but Burgundy certainly. I mean, yeah. No, there's some interesting changes afoot.
Yeah, it's like, do you prefer the father or the son?
Almost invariably the son. Only because one of the to be honest, one of the sort of strap lines we've often used at Honest Grapes, with regards to what we like about wine, is old vines, young winemakers. We love a plot of land which is just gold, and yet we also like young dynamic winemakers who recognize to bring the best out of it, you probably need to change the way you make your wine, like not absolutely blast everything with chemicals, or whatever, so I think old vines, young winemakers is a powerful combination.
Going full circle to what you actually introduced us to this evening was the cover crops, where you got all the thing that you noticed was all of the flowers and the other beautiful plants on either side of the vines, instead of it being so furrowed, and that is absolutely now, like literally current 2020, that is the thing, isn't it? Cover crops, sustainability, the bees, making sure that everything works in harmony.
Yeah, Karen, totally. And what was really interesting, being in Rome the other week, is that Italy, I think, is certainly one of the countries leading the charge. And there's all these different labels now on the back of bottles. It's not just biologico. You've got like a little bee label, and then another one which is sort of, everyone to one degree or another recognizes that this isn't just marketing bullshit. This is what you need to do to make great wine. And yes, you might need to spray, you might need to do something, you might need this, but and therefore you belong to a different group. But the fact is, what was once on the fringes of winemaking is now firmly at the center, at the center.
Yeah.
as of course it is, and always
No, it's great.
at
Healthy
Shenbleu.
wine.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, um, thinking of Bernard du Seigneur. Bernard du Seigneur, really a forerunner in the whole burying the horn and do the whole organic at great expense, personal expense. But making great wine because of it, because of his integrity. It really is integrity, isn't it, to what you believe in?
Yeah, and I, there's no denying that that using traditional winemaking methods, i.e., a conventional winemaking, is an easier way of guaranteeing a certain harvest, a certain level of cropping, and the more you take that away, the more you let the grapes fend for themselves, the more likely you are to lose potential yield through weather, through pest, through whatever, so it's taking a gamble, but you're right, it's putting your vision, your integrity, your philosophy ahead of your profits, and that is always to be admired and supported as a result.
Damn. Good. And we're back. I noted your comment about 2005 being a damp vintage, and interesting because everything is subject to the harvest weather, isn't it? So you've got that dread of the rain coming before you get the last vines in, and how that's going to impact upon the concentration and how it's going to come out. And it's always the risk, and everyone's fearful of it. But then you say, in spite of the fact that 2005 here in Montalcino was a damp vintage, here you are saying, well, actually, in spite of everything, it's not as concentrated, yes, but still one of your top, number 5 wine, in spite of the wet harvest, I guess.
Yeah, there was a comment which always stands out for me. Was years ago doing a blind tasting with Etienne de Monti, who's become a good friend over the years, does our Hospice de Beaune barrels, is doing our kosher Burgundy barrels, someone I will be seeing hopefully in 2 weeks' time when I'm out in Burgundy. And he blind tasted a group that I was with on what was considered a poor vintage and a good vintage, and we didn't know what was in the glass, etc., etc. And of course, the amazing surprise was, lo and behold, what was considered a weak vintage in Burgundy, 2003, turned out to be incredible wines. And he said, and I remember this very clearly, he said that great terroir will heal the vintage, and I think that's it. It is that when you've got incredible vineyards and beautifully looked after vines, then sure, the weather conditions are always going to do what they're going to do, for good or ill. But given time, quality will out. And I still remember that, and I think it's so true.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's played out with wine number 5, huh?
There you go. Wine number 5. Exactly. Yeah. Cool. Well, team, look, it's been a pleasure to see you all. And happy birthday, Mike, as well. I know this was your birthday, a birthday tasting, so happy birthday. I think it might have been Graham's too. Oh no, sorry, no, it was our birthday sessions. Anyway, it's been lovely to see you all. I hope you'll join us for our next session, which I think is Burgundy, could be Bordeaux, I can't remember, but anyway, we've got Burgundy and Bordeaux coming up. And then we'll actually be starting again the week after with a fortified tasting, because I think we're all going to need fortifying one way or another. Whatever the hell's going on in the world, we're going to need it. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Fabulous.
Cheers, everyone.
Great.
Thank you so much. Been a pleasure. Take care. See you soon. Ciao.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Cheers, Tom. Catch you later.